So we're going to be talking about 5 different subjects, but they all kind of fall under the umbrella of the economics of the home, or the family. We're going to look at education, parenting, marriage, vacation, and religion. So first, we're going to take a look at childhood education, specifically early childhood education. And so there's kind of an argument for universal preschool. So that'd be preschool and kindergarten programs before first grade, and the effects that it has on individuals in the United States as a whole. So first we'll look at the social benefits and the financial costs. So there are a lot of benefits associated with attending preschool and kindergarten programs. One of the biggest is that they found that less students will be in special education, especially low-income and minority students who are overrepresented in these programs. Because if you don't have the resources to have of going to these schools before first grade, you might be behind than your peers. And although there's no difference in mental capabilities, it's kind of misjudged as that when it's actually just lack of resources and experience. So that saves a ton of money for the schools because that's one of the biggest budgetary costs in education, special education, and also for those individuals, they don't get put in those lower tracks throughout elementary and beyond. And there's a couple other things that they compared people that were in programs and in preschool programs and those that weren't. They found that those who were in the programs had higher graduation rates, which obviously leads to higher wages, healthier lifestyles when it came to like smoking and other factors, and lower crime rates. So obviously this is all good for those individuals, but also the United States. The government can save a lot of money from medical expenses as well as the prison system, which we've talked about in the past. So what are the financial costs? Obviously this costs a lot of money to send every child in the United States to go to preschool for a year, then kindergarten for a year before entering first grade. So economists believe that it would take about 3.5 million teachers to fill the void right now because first off, there's the salaries that will be needed, but there's also not enough people that have bachelor degrees that are accredited to be able to work with these students. So you'd have to pay a salary, but then also set up these accreditation programs if people weren't able to go through 4 years of college to become these preschool teachers. There's also infrastructure needs. Yes, you could obviously use buildings that aren't in use right now, but down the road at some point you have to start building more schools to house these children in. And there's a bunch of other factors that go into it, but they believe that could cost between $8 and $15 billion a year to send these students, which obviously is a lot of money, but as Connor in Business Ed talked about last week, we spend a whole lot of money on defense and medical expenses and everything else in the United States government budget. So it's not that it's impossible, there's more just political reasons why it hasn't happened. So there's also economic benefits associated with this, if the moral argument wasn't enough just to benefit these students individually that go into these programs and need it. And there's also I'll give a real life example of one of these programs. So the economic benefits have mostly been found by the economist James Heckman from University of Chicago. He does a lot with human capital, education, and development. And I mentioned this in the artificial intelligence presentation last semester, but the 21st century skills are what will be needed in this new economy. And you learn a lot of these skills in preschool and kindergarten because a lot of the new jobs will have more to do with your social skill ability and rather than cognitive. And you learn a lot of this actually in preschool and kindergarten. It affects you down the road without you really realizing it. And again, just to emphasize, the biggest gains are for those students that are at a disadvantage. If you have students that are from upper level income households, if they don't go to preschool, the gain sending them to preschool isn't the exact same. So when it comes to benefits for low income students going into these programs, so you can even cut some of those costs if you just sent low income students to universal preschool programs. But Heckman believes that for every dollar invested, now you can get a 7 to 10% annual return on investment down the road. So it would pay for itself and then some. The Brookings Institute made this graph here. It's the percentage increase in GDP relative to baseline projections. And so here you can see that GDP would actually decrease in the first couple of years because the costs associated with sending these students to school, as well as less labor supply because those students, like I said, have high graduation rates, so they'll be in college and then could even go to grad school, and so there's less people in the workforce. But as you see, the GDP increases substantially over the coming decades. They had a couple different estimates. It's hard to pinpoint exactly, so use a few different models. But as high as 4% increase just from universal pre-K, and as low as 1.34. But even that 1.34 is still worth it in my mind. And so here's an actual example of a program that was used in the 1960s in Michigan. They went to a low-income area, and they took a small group of students and gave them put them in a preschool that had like the best quality teachers, every resource you could possibly need as a child at that age. And it was only, so it was 5 days a week, 3.5 hours each day, and then 1.5 hours a week where the teachers would actually go into the home just to check on things, make sure everything was going well there as well. And they then followed these students. They gave them no additional like benefits after these 2 years. They followed them for the next couple decades. And compared to their peers, they were able to find that all those benefits I mentioned earlier were true, and that the returns that these students got were higher than the post-World War II stock market returns to equity. So the argument here was that if you invest in human capital and education at an early age is very important compared to later down the road. They found that even if you start investing in second grade, it's already almost too late, that the returns are not nearly as substantial as if you do it before they ever even enter first grade. And with that, we're going to switch gears, and Alex is going to talk about marriage.
All right. So marriage markets. Starting off with this gentleman right here is Gary Becker. So Gary Becker was a pioneer in taking economic theory and applying it to all different sorts of topics, and in this case, of course, marriage markets. So some of the things that he wanted to analyze with this was number of births, income inequality, to allocation of leisure. If any of you have ever seen Freakonomics, as a continuation of a lot of the work that he did. So, what makes different markets? Well, the biggest difference is whether or not the marriage market is determined by love or financial gains. So as we all know, in India, they have dowries where the woman's family pays money to the man's family. And that is a marriage based on financial gains. In Western civilization, we have marriages based on love, where the individual chooses. That's funny. And another thing that he mentioned as important was divorce policy. Now, if a marriage is very costly, very difficult to get out of, people may be incentivized to get into it in the first place, and that changes the structure of the marriage markets. So, 2 principles of marriage markets, just to make them simple. The first one says that because either the individual or the parents are choosing for the person to get married, that the utility of being married is greater than the utility of being single. The second is saying that because it's competition and there are a limited number of mates, you're trying to maximize utility, trying to get the best mate. So, on to why should you get married? The time of a man and the time of a woman are not perfect substitutes. And that's not saying that one is better than the other. What it's saying is that, let's say you're going out on a date with somebody. You're paying a price for that person's time that is greater than their opportunity cost of, say, going out with their friends or sitting at home watching Netflix. I mean, I hope you're more interested in that. But so when you get married, instead of nice. So when you get married, if Cameron gets married, you'll see a reduction in the cost of frequent contact. What that means is that instead of having to drive over to your spouse's or your boyfriend, girlfriend's apartment, what you'll be able to do is just go home. They're sitting there on the couch waiting for you, and you end up paying a price for that person's time that's lower than what you'd be willing to pay, and vice versa, of course. So, why is marriage one man and one woman? So in a hypothetical market, there's 8 men and 8 women. Or no, 4 men, 4 women. It's easier. And one guy has 4 wives, and 3 guys are single. Well, for that one guy, we know because of the law of diminishing marginal utility, he loves his 4th wife less than his 3rd, less than his 2nd, less than his 1st. So, and of course, for those wives, they would be getting a greater utility from just if they each had their own husband. So in the broader market, you're maximizing utility by each person having one husband, one wife. Finally, gains from marriage, income marriage incentives. So gains from marriage, utility from a marriage depends on commodities produced by a household. So what are commodities produced by a household? What these are anything from love to, let's say, your spouse is a really good cooker, they make you some good food, that's a commodity, to the quality and quantity of children. Now, all that gets wrapped up in the variable z, which is equal to utility. Next, we see some equations that Becker wrote out. The ZMF, that's utility of a married couple, is equal to the full income divided by average cost of production of those commodities. Now, you see that full income is a function of your wage times time plus property values. So when property values increase, obviously we see that utility of the marriage is going to increase. However, when wages increase, though it does increase this variable of full income, it also is going to increase average cost of production. As we see, wage is a function of cost, and in this case it would be something like opportunity cost. Like instead of going on the date, the time is now worth, instead of $30, maybe $50. So that's it for income and marriage incentives. Next we're going to go to Mercedes. She's going to talk about some of those little commodities that you might produce.
So I'm going to talk about the economics of parenting. I think that parenting is actually super interesting because you could take it from a lot of different microeconomic perspectives. So utility, cost-benefit analysis, return on investment, etc. So when you have a child, you're basically investing in their future. And what is the best way to guarantee their success later down the road? So like if you are, for example, a Tiger mom, and you get your kid involved in like soccer practice and Boy Scouts and ballet lessons and piano lessons, it's not necessarily the fact that little Johnny is sitting behind a piano for 4 hours a week because his utility probably isn't super high, he's probably just super bored. But you're the type of parent that has those resources available. You have the drive and the educational experience and the income to support a child, and therefore they'll be successful later down the road because of your attributes. And also the type of behavior or the type of parent you are, and will definitely affect your child. So this is kind of self-explanatory, but like if you if you model good behavior for your children, so you recycle and you're nice to your waitress and you pay your taxes on time and stuff like that, that behavior will be reflected in your children, as opposed to like if you do some negative things, like if you drink and smoke cigarettes and stuff, it's more likely that your children will do activities like that. So next I examine different types of parenting styles. So if you imagine this on a sliding scale, permissive is kind of like a laissez-faire approach to parenting. So you allow your kids to make decisions on their own. And then on the complete opposite side of that is authoritarian. And that's more like a dictatorship. It's corporal punishment for doing things wrong, your way or the highway, and what you say goes. And then you could just kind of see that obviously these both extremes aren't very good, and there's a nice middle ground, and that's authoritative. And that is really, as a parent, it's your job to guarantee or look for the success of your children down the line. But the thing is, kids are really bad at that. They have their short-term goals in mind. They want to hang out with their friends at the movies on Friday night. They want dessert, things like that. And as a parent, you have long-term, like their health and education and career experiences and stuff like that. So being authoritative means balancing those goals of both of you guys. And that involves different types of incentives. So one example that I really liked was by an economist. He had a pre-K, a toddler in pre-K, and it was winter time, and it was really hot inside the building, but it was time to go home. And the struggle at the time was getting your child to put on his or her coat so that you guys can go outside. So he examined a woman struggling with her toddler to put on his coat. The kid was crying and screaming. His utility was super low and because he was having a tantrum. And then her utility was also super low because it's the end of the day. She wants to go home. But what he did, because he's an economist and infinitely smarter than everybody else, he restructured the incentive. So he took out his toddler out in the freezing cold for a microsecond, and she, by herself, put the coat on because she wants to be warm. Now, by having that incentive compatibility, that means that you can create incentives so that your children do what you want them to do on their own. And here are different types of incentives. So coercion goes with that authoritarian. That's just telling them what to do, and there's consequences if you don't do it. And then there's absence, which is more permissive. Both of these have problems because coercion could cause resentment, and being absent could definitely affect their long-term goals. They might not be as productive in the future, and there's nice persuasion incentive in the middle. And kind of related to this is how different economies affect parenting style. So on these graphs, here is an index that measures income inequality, and then on the y-axis, it's different qualities that parents look for or emphasize in their children. So, excuse me, I didn't explain this well enough, but on the lower end, it's countries like Sweden, Norway, that have a smaller income inequality, and then on the right side, it's countries like the United States that we have a large distribution of wealth. So the first one is imagination, and countries like Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, they really stress these types of jobs, whereas countries like France and Spain do not. And it kind of makes sense. So if you're in one of those countries, you can be successful if you're an artist or if you work in a restaurant or something like that. And on the flip side of that, here's working hard. And you can see that countries like the United States, France, Spain, we really stress these attributes in our children because in our economy, things like secondary education are really important. We want our kids to be lawyers and doctors, so we really stress working hard. And this is kind of like a flip of the last graph, so you can see that Sweden, Norway, Finland, they don't emphasize this as much as we do. And this is the last one, it's independence. It's just kind of cool to see where different countries lie on this graph, but you could apply the different types of parenting styles. So the permissive types of parents are the ones that are more emphasize creativity and imagination, whereas the more authoritarian parents are like the United States, France and Spain, and they really emphasize working hard. So that's it for me, and now I'm going to pass it off to Brian because he's going to talk about vacation.
I'm going to talk about family vacations, and so I decided to dress the part. So just quick, before I get into family vacation, I'm going to shoot some of the numbers at you. For those of you who are falling asleep, give me a few more seconds, I'll make it more interesting after the numbers. So $2.1 trillion of economic activity come from the U.S. travel industry, and from that, that's lodging, transportation, tax revenue from actually traveling. There's about 15 million jobs supported by the travel industry, and as of last year, 4 of every 5 domestic trips were on leisure. So it's either saying that's vacation or visiting relatives. Most of the time, you're probably going to bring your family when you're on a trip for leisure. So I want to focus on family vacations to the beach, and why I chose the beach is because it's an interesting area because there's 2 big seasons and they're both completely opposite, and you can tell that local economies thrive on one of them and the other one not so much, and that's the spring, like people like us who go on spring break, and that is like the late summer for the families. And local officials, usually around Florida is where most of the data came from, is why they prefer families is because, well, think about it, families have more disposable income, they always go out to eat compared to students who are typically really broke and never go out to eat. And I have experienced both of them. So when I would go with my family, typically, grandparents, parents, we'd go out to eat every single day for dinner, sometimes lunch, not all the time, but dinner, and the bill would be astronomical. Way more than I could afford personally. But when I was on spring break in Daytona, no. I went to like this dingy pizza shop, and every day it was really cheap, it was nothing, so I didn't spend any money. Which brings us to my next point about actual disposable income and stuff you buy there. I wasn't buying trinkets and I wasn't buying these souvenirs. I wasn't doing anything for entertainment. All the entertainment you needed was at the beach or at the pool. But a family, you might go see a movie, you might play miniature golf, ride go-karts, you might do something cool, you might go travel. So therefore, you're spending more money, these things are taxed, and therefore it's going to generate more revenue for the local economy. And last of all is, well, I think I speak for most families when I say they don't exactly rage. So therefore, there's lower negative externalities. It's a lower cost to state for the local economy. You're not gonna employ or put on duty more officers for families. They're not breaking stuff. They're not typically loud. Local businesses aren't hiring extra help for janitorial service. They're not trashing the hotel pool, and that is completely contrary to the spring break crowd. I couldn't leave my hotel without seeing a fight, a drug bust, or something getting broken. That's just how it is, and therefore, actually, the people who pay for it are the people who live in the community, and that's a negative externality. And that's why most of the time, local economies prefer families. Now, what is this going to cost a family typically? Transportation will run about $2,100. That kind of seems high, but also I'm going to assume this data came from a lot of families that flew. Because I mean, 2,100 sounds about average for to fly a whole family round trip. That sounds about right. Food, $35 per person per day. But however, I also read where people usually budget for $100 per day if you're a family that drinks a lot and you go out to dinner. I mean, drinks aren't cheap, and then actually the actual bill isn't cheap anyway. Lodging is about $150 a night. That's pretty standard. And taxes, what they don't really calculate into their budget is really how much you're going to pay in taxes on your trip, and actually can increase your total expenditure about 58%. So an entire trip based on where you cut costs, who you go with, can run you around $1,100 to $4,500. Now, I mentioned earlier that local economies thrive because of this. Now, they thrive because of asymmetric information, and you can actually employ the tourist trap model to really explain why local economies and vacation spots really thrive. So what it says is that when there's a large number of uninformed consumers that know the general prices but not the actual prices of a service, or whatever it is you're buying, the cost of finding the lower price is extremely high. Well, think about it. I mean, especially on vacation. If you're on vacation, that's your leisure time. I mean, what do you value your leisure time? It's probably extremely high. So spending time to find a lower price around vacation, as high as it is, not to mention you actually have to pay, whether you're driving to go find places, you don't know where anything's at. So therefore, that is extremely expensive. And because they know that, they can exploit high prices above marginal cost. And I want to illustrate this in a graphic here. In a typical, perfectly competitive market, obviously, price equals marginal cost. I'm sure all of you know that. But if you raise prices above marginal cost, typically you wouldn't make anything. No one would buy from you. However, if you raise it enough, but below the cost it is to find the lower price, you can operate in this area here, and you can actually make more profit than charging just marginal cost. And that's really how local economies can thrive on the fact that there's so many tourists that don't know what anything costs. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin, who's going to talk about religion within the family.
Let's get right into it. Alright, so I'm going to be talking about a couple different aspects of religion, specifically religions as a market, the economics of religion, and lastly, tying it all back to what we've been talking about and its effects on the family. So first, as a marketplace, you can think of religions as firms, and then they're all competing for their consumers, which would be congregants in this sense. And what I found in a lot of papers is that that make this comparison is that the more religious freedom a country has, the more and better the religion is. And basically what that means is that more people are going to be participating in religious activities, and that's represented by the greater religiosity. Next would be the economics of religion. So this is like a super specific sect of economics, like really applied behavioral stuff. And it's not the study of money and religion, or how religion is financed, or the merit of one versus the other. It focuses on behavior of humans and more of the human side of religion. So for example, you could think of a two-period utility model. First period being present time, or on this earth, as U1, and then the afterlife, if you believe in that, as U2. So the first equation up here would be considered someone who's strictly atheist and doesn't believe at all in the afterlife. So that's why they have a beta factor of 0, which means their discounted future utility is equal to 0, so that second utility afterlife is equal to 0, so they only care about what's going on right now, what's making them the most happy in this life. And then the other model would be someone who is religious and does care about the afterlife, so they may discount the present, which is why they have a beta in front of their U1 rather than the U2. So someone like Connor would have a beta value pretty close to 0 for that, because he's in the moment and he only cares about the craft ale consumption, which God may frown upon that, but Connor may say too many craft ales, that's no such thing. That's a blessing right there. Someone like Serby might say, well, who cares about this? And I might say, well, Serby, that hurt my feelings. I'm gonna raise a coup, and then I'm going to appoint myself as the Supreme Chancellor for the last 2 weeks. Don't say it. Don't say it. Lastly, we're going to talk about religion and its effects on the family. So historically, there's been a correlation between the amount of religion that one consumes and how that impacts their family structure and the parenting that goes on. So if you think of the Puritans back in colonial America, their children were seen and not heard, so they were working in the fields and then coming back and praying. There wasn't really much love or nurture going on there. It was kind of just, you're working towards the farm and you're working towards God. So that's how they approached that. And then this is a specific study that was done in Minnesota. It looked at religious women and the amount of times they went to their place of worship and also the mean number of children they had. So the x-axis would be the frequency of going to their worship place, and then y-axis is the number of children. And as you can see, it's not linear, but there is a positive correlation with how much you go to church and how many kids you have. And basically, the writers of this kind of summed it up in a couple different possible reasons why they saw those observations. But one other thing that they didn't mention was like the group sharing aspect of religion. So that's not something that you can really get outside of the marketplace for free. So a lot of times churches or synagogues or temples or other places of worship may have like free childcare or dinners or things like that that make the cost of parenting lower, makes the cost per child lower. So you may see an increase in the number of children that people have because the costs that they take on aren't as high as someone who wasn't religious. So with all these different things that we've talked about, respect to the family in mind, we're going to go into a discussion group.